Hello, and thank you for your interest and participation in this training. My name is David Miller, and I'm a forensic scientist at the West Virginia State Police Forensic Laboratory in the Biology Processing Section in South Charleston, West Virginia. The title of this presentation is Direct Submission of Sexual Assault Evidence Collection Kits to the West Virginia State Police Forensic Laboratory. Prior to May of 2020, sexual assault evidence collection kits, which I'm going to refer to as sexual assault kits or sex crime kits, were given to law enforcement officers after collection who then submitted that evidence to the forensic laboratory. As of May the 18th, 2020, however, House Bill 4476 is in effect, which states that, upon collection, a sexual assault forensic examination kit shall be submitted for testing by the healthcare provider to the West Virginia State Police Forensic Laboratory within 30 days of collection or as soon thereafter as practical. All packaging kits for transmittal and transmittal protocols shall be designed to meet applicable standards for maintaining the efficacy of the sample and the chain of custody. We'd like to discuss further today the implications that this bill has on those of us that are responsible for the collection, investigation, and testing of sex crime kits in West Virginia. I do want to point out first, though, that we are only talking about those sexual assault cases that are reported to law enforcement. All non-reported sexual assaults will still be collected and sent to the Marshall University Forensic Science Center for storage in the same way that they are today. Well, why do we need to change from a law enforcement submission of sex crime kits to a direct deposit from the collecting facility itself? I'll give 4 reasons, and I'll begin with a Senate bill passed in 2019, which is the Sexual Assault Victims Bill of Rights, or Senate Bill 72. West Virginia Senate Bill 72 states, among other things, and I'm looking at number 3, states that a sexual assault victim has the right to have a sexual assault evidence collection kit tested and preserved by the investigating law enforcement agency. It goes further in number 4 to say that they have the right to be informed by the investigating law enforcement agency of any results of the forensic medical examination if such a disclosure would not impede or compromise an ongoing investigation. We'll come back to that in the frequently asked questions at the end of this instruction. Reason number 2 that a direct deposit is necessary. It's easy to believe that if a victim goes through the process of having a sex crime kit collected and that kit is then sent to law enforcement, it's reasonable to believe that that kit is always then sent to the laboratory for testing. And that's just not the case, and it hasn't been the case historically. In the next slide, I'll show you the data that we've collected at the State Police Crime Lab over the last several years, comparing the number of sexual assault kits that are distributed in our state to the number of sexual assault kits that are actually submitted to the State Police Crime Lab. With this graph, it's easy to see that the majority of the distributed sexual assault kits never come back to the West Virginia State Police Crime Lab for testing. We do know that about 50 kits a year are non-reported sexual assaults that are being stored at the Marshall University Forensic Science Center. And we also know that about 50 kits a year are used for training purposes, leaving up to 300 sexual assault kits alone last year that were potentially collected and never submitted to the laboratory. One of the reasons that not all sexual assault kits are submitted to the lab is that the decision was made that there was not going to be a prosecution in that case for whatever reason. So without that prosecution, law enforcement did not send those kits to the laboratory. But West Virginia has received a significant grant through the District Attorney of New York called the Danny Grant, and also working through the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative Program, SAECK, to go back and test previously unsubmitted kits from 2016 and prior in our state. And we learned through those projects that in cases where a male DNA profile was identified, a foreign male DNA profile in sexual assault cases, that 40% of those individuals were either linked to another unsolved sexual assault or a solved sexual assault or to a convicted offender somewhere in the United States. So even in those cases where either the victim decides not to follow through with the prosecution or the investigation, or the prosecuting attorney decides not to prosecute in the case, by testing those kits and generating male DNA profiles where a sexual assault is believed to have occurred, we are able to link case to case and case to convicted serial sexual assault offenders in the United States, and either help solve other unsolved cases or the case at hand by going ahead and doing the testing on all kits. And lastly, House Bill 4476 requires it. We no longer have the option in our state to not submit a collected sexual assault kit when it is reported to law enforcement. Well, this sounds fairly easy then. The collecting facility is just going to mail the sex crime kit to the lab, right? That's all we have to do. And to a degree, it is that easy, but we've been doing it the other way where the law enforcement officer comes to the hospital and picks up the kit for so long that this really is a big change. How much of a change does depend on the relationship between the hospital and law enforcement in your community, and I would like to point out some of the more significant aspects of this that we've been able to identify. As we go through them, I will attempt to identify whether it's most important for the law enforcement side of the equation or whether it's more important for the collecting facility to make considerations as to what changes are needed. The first change that we may see with the direct deposit has to do with the hospital forms or the kit documents. This is for both law enforcement and the collecting facility. Inside of each kit, there are 3 copies of the hospital forms or kit documents. 1 copy is for the hospital itself, 1 is for us here at the laboratory, and 1 is for the law enforcement officer. How will the law enforcement officer copy be given to that responding officer? It does require that someone still show up at the hospital in order to initiate the investigation and take possession of their copy, the law enforcement copy of the hospital documentation. If law enforcement does not show up at the hospital to take possession of their copy of the form, does your facility have a protocol that would allow you to either fax or physically mail that copy to them? If not, then I'd like to come back to that question in the frequently asked question portion of this training to discuss what would happen if no one shows up at the hospital to take possession of their copy of the paperwork. Another point is the laboratory's copy of the hospital forms really needs to be placed in the outside envelope on the outside of the sex crime kit and not returned to the inside of the kit. Why is that? When that kit shows up here at the laboratory to our evidence receiving unit, we do not want the evidence receiving staff to have to open the kit box itself. They'd be physically opening evidence just to obtain a copy of paperwork. They need to be able to open the envelope on the exterior of the kit to obtain the documentation so that we can enter the case into our management system, information management system here at the lab. We have already seen examples of facilities tearing off that envelope and placing it back inside the kit, believing that that's the proper way to do it, when in fact it's exactly the opposite of what we need. We would ask that the collecting facility please return all kit documents to the laboratory copy of the documents in the envelope that's on the outside of the sex crime kit. Next, let's talk about how it is determined who is the responding officer, who is the investigating officer, or what is the investigating agency that's going to be contacted by the hospital. So this is a facility consideration, is who are you going to put on page 1 of the hospital documentation as the responding officer and the law enforcement agency responsible for this case. It's my understanding that in some communities, sexual assaults are always reported to either the same individual at a law enforcement agency or at least the same agency, and in other facilities it may be a decision to be made whether it's going to go to city, county or the state police, or perhaps that victim has traveled from another part of the state to that hospital, and the responding law enforcement agency may not even be in the same county. But how do you determine this information to complete the form in your community is a question that's going to be have to be answered by you at your particular facility. This is page 1 of the hospital documentation with the area highlighted where the responding officer's name will go. We're asking the facility to please put the name of the responding officer in this location on the form along with their agency, and if you know it, their phone number. It may become important later for us to contact that law enforcement officer and ask them for a case submission form to be submitted in this case. We must know who to contact. This is a report to law enforcement, so we need to know who is the responding officer in your case. Our next consideration to discuss in direct deposits is the Sexual Assault Evidence Collection Kit tracking number and software. Every kit that's sent out in our state has a unique tracking number attached to it, and it is this number that we use to track the flow of that kit across its lifespan from unused all the way to return back to the investigating agency. As a side note, just know that House Bill 4476 requires that we upgrade our tracking system to allow victim access so that the victim can determine the location of their kit. In order for that victim to know the location of their kit, it is imperative that all of us involved in entering this information be diligent about entering in the disposition of the kit as it's collected or as it's moved in the system. Each hospital has a designated sexual assault kit coordinator who is responsible for ordering kits and tracking the disposition of collected kits in the sexual assault kit tracking system. With direct deposit, all reported sexual assaults should be dispositioned to the West Virginia State Police Forensic Lab in the tracking system. The next slide will show an example of how we've modified that system to make that a little bit easier. In this screenshot of the sexual assault kit tracking system, you can see that we've moved the West Virginia State Police Forensic Laboratory and froze it at the top of the list of law enforcement agencies in West Virginia. Once at the facility level you have collected the kit, this number 6321 for example was marked as kit disposition to law enforcement agency, and then select the West Virginia State Police Forensic Laboratory as that agency. In this way, we know from the tracking system that the kit went from the hospital to us here at the crime lab. With further updates, this is also how the victim is going to know that usually her kit has went from the hospital to the crime lab, and when that victim queries the system, that person will then know that their kit is in our custody. Here's another screenshot from the kit tracking system showing the options that are available to select if the kit is not going to the State Police Crime Lab. Every kit needs to be dispositioned once it leaves the hospital. If it's going to Marshall University as a non-report, select Marshall University. If the kit is not used or destroyed, make that selection. You'll then be prompted to say why it was not used or destroyed. If the kit is used for training or forwarded to another hospital, please disposition all of your kits with one of these options so that our tracking system will know where that kit is, in particular when the victim begins to query the system to know what happened to their particular kit. Let's discuss now how to actually get the sexual assault kit to the lab. In the past, like we've mentioned, you would have just handed this to the law enforcement officer after it was sealed. There's really no difference here in how the kit should be handled at the facility level, the hospital facility level. Once it's collected, it should still be sealed and stored in the same way it would be stored as if you were waiting for a law enforcement officer to come and get that kit. The only difference is now it's going to be packaged and sent to the laboratory using Federal Express. The West Virginia State Police is paying for this shipping service. We are sending each collection facility a prepaid Federal Express shipping label and a materials placard for each kit. That material placard is required by Federal Express, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But we are asking that you place the kit itself, the sexual assault kit, in the larger box. The West Virginia blood urine collection kit, which should be a separate box and not inside of the other main box. It should be kept separate, along with that paperwork that we mentioned on the outside of the envelope. And then any other clothing bags that were collected as a result of the forensic medical examination. All of these things should be placed together inside a larger shipping box. That shipping box should just be a sturdy cardboard box that we are not providing. And then I will also show you in a couple of slides what that package should look like once you have it prepared. Here we have examples of the Federal Express shipping label that we're asking you to use to mail the kit to the State Police Crime Lab. It is addressed to the Forensic Laboratory on 725 Jefferson Road, South Charleston, West Virginia. I want to avoid any confusion with the shipping label that's inside the kit in the non-report envelope that's going to go to Marshall University if the victim chooses not to report to law enforcement. It's a very similar looking label. The only difference is the mailing address. That shipping label is inside the non-report envelope inside the kit and should only be used for those kits going to Marshall University. If it is a report to law enforcement, it should use the shipping label addressed to the State Police Forensic Laboratory. And Federal Express requires that a shipping placard, the UN 3373 biological substance category B label, be affixed to the outer package. They require this. Federal Express will not ship what they determine to be a biohazard. So you should not put a biohazard label on the outside of the shipping container. Federal Express considers the biohazard sticker to mean that it is known to be a biohazard. They consider a biological substance to be one that's not been tested to determine if it's a biohazard or not. So we are following their guidelines specifically and using this biological substance placard to its intent, which is to say that these substances have not been tested to determine if a biohazard is in fact there. These are the only two labels that should be on the outside of the kit once it's prepared to mail. Please read and understand these additional guidelines provided by FedEx from their website regarding infectious substances in Category B. Our gray top tubes in the blood urine collection kit, as well as the urine specimen cup, are leak-proof primary containers. We also provide secondary packaging, which is a sealable plastic bag with an absorbent material inside to contain that fluid should it leak, for subpoint 2 there. And subpoint 3 would be an outer package of adequate strength for its capacity, mass, and intended use, which is the sex crime kit and the blood urine kit boxes themselves. In the photograph on the left, you'll see all of the materials necessary to send a sex crime kit from the collecting facility to us here at the State Police Lab. You see that the sex crime kit itself, the larger white box, is an individual box. It does not contain the smaller toxicology kit that's in front, and the larger bag containing clothing is also a separate bag. You've got your two labels, your UN 3373 placard and the shipping label. All of that together should look like the photograph on the right, where the only two labels on the exterior package are the shipping label and the shipping placard. Due to accreditation standards here at the Forensic Lab, we will still require that the investigating officer complete laboratory submission forms 53 and 53A for each sexual assault kit. So we're speaking to law enforcement officers here, responding and investigating officers. Once you have received your copy of the hospital documentation from the kit, we are going to need to match up your submission form with that physical evidence once it's here at the laboratory. We are asking that you reference the kit number on the submission form on your case submission forms so that we can identify which kit your submission form corresponds with. Here is an example of what that should look like on a case submission form. In the upper right-hand corner in red, I've indicated that the sex crime kit tracking number is WVSP 01234. Once the law enforcement officer has the hospital documentation in hand, Each page of that hospital document has the kit tracking number on it. Just transcribe that number into this location, the exact number for your individual kit. This slide and the following 3 slides contain some frequently asked questions which we've already heard with regard to direct deposit. Take a look at those, and then if you have any further questions, comments, suggestions, please feel free to call me or contact me here at the State Police Crime Lab so that we can all work together to make this work, and in doing so, ensure that all kits are collected and tested in West Virginia. Thank you.